One.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the UFL Athletic Association's operating budget workshop. This is not a formal meeting of the board or any of its committees, and no action will be taken. This is for informational purposes only. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff to walk us through the budget, and I'd encourage all of you to please ask any questions or any clarification you might need. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Neely. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review our 2021-22 operating budget here. What I'm going to do is I have some PowerPoint slides I'm going to run through. And if you have any questions on the budget itself, please feel free to jump in. I will stop after each slide to entertain questions. Before I get started, though, I would like to acknowledge the Athletic Business Office staff for putting this budget together. Without them, they were instrumental in putting it together, working with our coaches and staff. Without them, this budget wouldn't have been possible. So I appreciate all the work that Deanna McMail, Russell Hill, and Weston Imes put into this. Okay, Jake, next slide. So again, this is my favorite time of year. I love the workshop. It gives us a chance to talk openly, freely, get comments. It's a back and forth to talk about our budget before it's actually presented to the board. So I like to consider like a shakeout. Let's look at everything. Let's look at our assumptions. Let's make sure everybody understands them, that they're comfortable with them. And then if there's any feedback we could take back, we can make adjustments prior to the June vote. The goal here is that all the members of the board do understand the budget, that they're comfortable with our assumptions, and that they have all their questions answered before the vote. This next slide is our timeline. So how do we put the budget together? This is a little different than past years, and I'll get into why. But first, back in February, we started looking at our revenue targets and try to figure out how much revenue are we going to have. There was a lot of uncertainty, so we came back and we kept falling between 106 and 107 million. So based on that, we took February, also in February, we took a lot of our fixed expenses that we either deferred or that we funded from our FY20 year in surplus, and we added those back on the expense side. So, and I'll get into those a little bit later too. So that basically allowed us to see how much freedom we have on the expense side when working on our budgets. In the month of March, we finalized our revenue projection. So we actually went from about 106 up to 107.7, and we used that as our planning base. And then in March and April, we started working with all of our staff. Actually, it was early March on our staff, trying to get them to meet a target, which I'll get into that as well. And then we spent the month of April doing a final balancing of our revenue expenses so that the revenue expenses on our operating budget did agree. And then we sat down more than once with Vince, but in April we did a final review with Vince to make sure that our budget was not only sound, but it also met our goals and values, because that's something we get so tied up in the detail that we also like to step back occasionally and look and say, are we meeting all the objectives, our goals and values? So that was a key review with Vince there. And then finally, we review it with Dan and Rick Rosaric over in the budget office, make sure they're comfortable with our assumptions. And we did that this past Monday. So they basically signed off on it, and they felt comfortable with what we were going with here in our budget. Is there any questions on the timeline? If not, we'll turn to the revenue budget. So this is a challenging year. There's still a lot of uncertainty. When we sat down in February, there was more uncertainty at that point than there is now. So our goal was we had to be very conservative in our revenue. So we planned for a gradual recovery from FY21 to 22 because of the uncertainties with capacity restrictions, social distancing. So that's what we started, very conservative. And I'm just going to run through some of our sources now. One of our growth areas and our largest source of revenue is our ACC and CA money, which is about 35.6 million. And most of that is on our ACC revenue TV money. So that was our biggest growth area. And you'll see more of that as we go through some of the slides. One area we were really conservative in is our ticket sales. We originally went back and we looked at FY20, which was our last solid year with really no COVID. And we decided to budget about 80% of our actual sales from FY20. So that number came out, and that's for football and men's basketball, and to a degree, women's basketball. And with that, we landed at about 23.3 million from those revenue sources. The third piece are donations, suites, and rentals. Again, we were really conservative in this area because we just don't know, again, with capacity, but also the economy, where that's going to land. So we were extremely conservative in that area, and we took about 80% of sales there as well, and that was about 21 million in that area. And then the next area, the marketing, we projected about 15.9 million there, and that I think that's up a little bit. And a lot of that is there's a $500,000 line there for the naming rights at Cardinal Stadium. We hope to get that finalized next fiscal year, but we realize it won't be at the beginning. So we'll probably, hopefully, receive a little bit of incremental revenue from that in the next fiscal year. So we went ahead and budgeted about 500,000 there. And we also increased our licensing on merchandise a little bit. So we actually have a little growth in that marketing area. And then the next line there, the game guarantees, this is mostly the Chick-fil-A. It's gone up over $4 million. We get a $4.3 million guarantee for playing Ole Miss down in Atlanta in the Chick-fil-A game. But most of that's offset by expenses, which we'll get to that in some later slides. And then finally, the other piece of revenue is the concessions and parking, projecting that at about 3.5 million. We're actually a little bit higher there. We went to 90%. Because we feel there could be some pent-up demand as people attend our games. There could be more concessions. So we actually budget that a little higher than the 80%. So all in all, that's our major sources of revenue for our operating. And again, it's a very conservative estimate. So are there any questions on our revenue?
Hey, Jeff, on the top line, 35.6 million, can you break that down generally?
Yes, about 20, I think about 28 million. That's actually the TV money. That's the media. And then we get some money for like the football. There's several different lines in the AC distribution. And actually I have it right here. I can kind of go through, but I think a lot of it's over in the football budget. But one of the bigger growth areas also is the playoff. There's a big increase in that line, over $1 million for next year. And then there's some smaller increases in some of the other lines, like for the ACC men's basketball tournament. And then we get some pass-through money from the NCAA. It's our grant and aid money and our sports sponsorship. There's a little bit of growth there as well. But the bulk of that, Steve, is in that TV money. That's about 28 million of that 35.
Thanks. That's what I was looking for.
You're welcome.
Jeff, in the ACC distribution, is there equal disbursements, or is there disparity among teams for longevity in the conference or anything like that?
It's split evenly. Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
One thing to note on the ACC network, I'll hit it now, it may come up later, is that the growth in the ACC network this year is two-pronged. One is that we'll have a full year run rate of all the subscribers that were on board last fiscal year that came on at varying times for this full fiscal year. The second thing is Comcast Xfinity is not currently a subscriber. Their members aren't. And that contract with ESPN runs out at the end of September. So the anticipation and budget is from the conference and anticipation of those subscribers coming on board sometime in hopefully right away October 1.
Hey, Vince or Jeff, what did we pay for that magnificent facility down on campus for our own television coverage building?
In total, it was about $8 million. And I'd say, almost 3/4 of that was around equipment and software.
And Steve, it's pretty much paid
certainly
for
made
itself.
that back.
Yeah, it's pretty much paid for itself. And Kenny's crew does a great job, and that's a real growth area in our revenue budget. Okay, if no other questions, I'm going to go over just the next graph here. Just shows 3 years of actuals on our revenue and then 2 years of budget. So if you take out the 107.7 and you take out the 4 million for the Chick-fil-A, I'm trying to normalize the figures here. So really our operating budget's about 103 if you want to compare apples to apples. So if you look at that and you normalize it, you'll see how conservative we are in this revenue budget. The 103 is basically puts us in line with where we were back in FY18. You can see we actually had about 103 million in revenue in 18, and our budget for next year is about a 103, 3 or 4. So again, very conservative on the revenue side. You can see we were trending up there until FY21, and then with FY21, actually, we're anticipating about 71 million in revenue there. So you can see the big drop off. and then a gradual recovery back to where we were before. So hopefully it's just a one-year blip, and we can get back on that positive trajectory going forward. This next graph table just shows the sources of our increase in some high-level areas. So you have our $95.1 million FY21 budget. Again, you can see seed donations. We actually are budgeting a little less next year, $145,000. The other category, that's some NCAA, ACC money we have coming through. About 800 of that increases from that area. The marketing area is going up slightly, and then the two big growth areas again are men's basketball and the football program, and most of that again is the media money. In the basketball, it's almost all media, and then in football you have that $4 million for the Chick-fil-A game as well as the media. So that's why football is going up 9. 4 of that is actually for the Chick-fil-A guarantee. So that's how we went from our current year budget of 95.1 up to 107.7. This is just a pie chart of the sources of revenue. As you can see, 43% of our budget comes from football, followed by men's basketball, and then the annual seed donations, and then marketing is our fourth largest bucket of revenue. This is up a little bit. Football went up a little bit by 4% because of the Chick-fil-A. I think last year was about 39%. So this is pretty consistent from year to year, but this just basically gives you a breakdown of the areas. Okay, this is a new graph. I wanted to put in, or a table, I wanted to put in where the budget stands compared to this budget, this current fiscal year, and then the actual last good year we had, FY20. And you can see the revenue sources. I think you can see here how we're trying to be very conservative. So the ACC, that first line, there's where our growth is, about $5 million. Again, most of that's our media money. It's up over $5 million from actual and up over 27.7 for the current year budget. Ticket sales, if you look, we're actually budgeting a little less than this current year, and that even includes with one more football game next year. That's something to keep in mind is this year we have 6 games, next year we have 7, and we're still budgeting a little less than our ticket revenue. And if you compare it to FY20, we're about $4 million under our last good year. So again, there you can see how conservative we're trying to be on the revenue side. Marketing up slightly. Again, that's mostly due to the naming rights. Hopefully we can generate some revenue from that area that we haven't had for a while. Donations, another area we're being very conservative in, as I mentioned earlier. You can see that back in 20 we had 17.2 million, and we're budgeting just over 14 for this coming year, and we were at 14.1 this year. And then rentals and suites, again, very conservative. We were at 8.2 last in FY20. Now we're down to 6.8, and you can see the game guarantees going up to 4 million for Chick-fil-A. And then all the other ones are pretty much in line with prior years. The other category, that is actually some ACC network growth we have. We're getting an increase in our stipend next year, so we're actually increasing the ACC network revenue in that area by a little bit. So a little incremental lift there as well. So these are the big areas of our revenue. So does anyone have any questions on these?
Yeah, Jeff, just a couple. So it looks like on ticket sales, you budgeted 80%. Totally makes sense to me. Is that effectively what you did on the donations as well? Yeah.
Pretty much, Larry. It's I look at the ratio of trend data. I do a lot of trend analysis, and I try to trend it out that way. And yeah, it landed about 80%. So we try to keep those in line, the donations with the tickets, as well as the suites and concessions. We kind of look at that as well, and then kind of do an eyeball test. But yeah, it's pretty much lock and step with the ticket sales.
Okay, because the donations, the big bulk of it is the licenses, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Seat license. And that doesn't include capital gifts, of course. That's just basically our seat donations. Point that out.
Jeff, question down here. What is the university support? Is my mic on? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Okay. What is the university support, or what is the source of that?
Sure. The big piece of it is the student fee. About $900,000 that comes from the student fee paid by all the students that attend university. And then we've got 2 other pieces. We have a gender equity commitment and a retention. And those 2 go back several years. And the one, I think it's the gender equity, was basically when we added the rowing program. Kevin Miller worked an arrangement out with Dean Nystrom to actually return some of that additional incremental revenue back to athletics, because we were bringing in, I don't know what the roster size for that
It's one
is.
of large, probably 65. Probably 65 are on the rowing roster.
So there was an agreement to return part of that back to athletics to help support that new rowing program. That's the majority of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then talking about the university athletic support. So this graph, basically in the gray, it'll show you, it's again 3 years of actuals, and this shows the university support in the gray. So you can see it tailed off. It was at 4 million, and it's actually gone up a little bit next year. But to this graph, I also wanted to add how much we budget in our budget for direct payments to the university for our scholarship athletes. So you can see in the bar charts in the red, that's just the tuition for our 295 student athletes that we pay directly to the university. That doesn't include any books, room and board, or our walk-on student athletes or managers who pay on their own. So you can see just on the direct payments, while we're getting 2-3 million, we're also returning 10 to 11 million each year. So the university is netting about 7 million annually from that support.
The drop from 18 to 19 and where it leveled off is we cut the student athletic fee in half.
Yeah, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at one point, it's been a few years ago, so my numbers may be off, but I think we added like spirit teams and all the other incremental tuition revenue, and it seemed to me that number was about 15 million to the university in tuition. Does that sound directionally correct?
Yes, Larry, that's just in our operating budget. That's what we budget, and there's a slide coming up that'll show you the aid by the breakout, but it's about 15 million for room, book, board, and all that. But that doesn't include a lot of the walk-ons that are paying on their own. So that's just what we subsidize out of our operating budget. But there's a slide that shows you the breakout by the 15 million, how much the total is we've returned.
Larry, to your point, we fund 295 scholarships, and we have well over 600 student athletes in the probably 670 range.
Okay, if there's no more questions on revenue, we'll turn to the expense side. So knowing what our revenue was, we came up with in past years we've done a zero-based budget, but this has been a really tough budget. So we took an incremental approach because we had to build back a lot of those not one time, but the expenses we deferred or funded from year. And so we had to build those in first. Those were our priority. So we basically started to get to that number. We started our 95.1 million FY21 budget, and then we had to add back our fixed cost and those other areas, which I'm going to get to. So we had the $500,000 increase in financial aid, which is really a 1% tuition increase, but we also had to budget for some of the student athletes who are returning for that extra year. So we added that. We added a $400,000 increase for our insurance, and then we budgeted another $500,000 for our contingency. So right there, we were at 1.4 million. So then we had to go back and add the other areas that were either deferred, cut, or funded from year end. And the first one was we deferred that $2 million for the Cardinal Stadium naming rights in FY21. So we have to add that back to our operating budget. The 1.3 for the former football coach, we had to add that back because that was funded at our FY20 surplus. And then we had to add 1.9 to our contingency for performance bonus and postseason travel. And the reason for that is part of our mitigation strategy was a lot of our coaching staff, they gave up their bonuses last year, and we were expecting maybe a decrease in our postseason travel. So we had to make sure we had all that covered. So we added 1.9 million to our contingency for that piece. And then the final, this was one of the highest priorities of this budget, is we all took a budget cut this current fiscal year. We wanted to build that back in. Our staff's been working extremely hard through all these challenging times. So that was a high priority for us. So right off the bat, we wanted to add that 1.4 back to bring everyone's salary back where it was in FY20. So right there, that's an additional 8 million we had to add back. So if you take the 95.1 where we're in FY21, and then you add the 8 million, that's 103.1 just in those fixed costs. And if you go back to our revenue, we were projecting revenue at about 103.4 if you exclude the Chick-fil-A. So you can see we had a little issue here we had to work through because we have a lot of our teams have travel commitments. There's a lot of contractual commitments, and that extra 100,000 or 300,000 wasn't enough flexibility to help cover some of these needs that we have in the coming fiscal year.
Just to provide a little context around a couple of these bullet points, the $2 million deferred on the fiscal 22 for Cardinal Stadium naming rights settlement, it's an $8 million obligation. We have 4 more years of $2 million, so this is one of the 4 remaining. And on the 1.3 related to the former head coach, this would complete our liability related to him. The staff reductions, as most know, where we reduced the staff for their compensation from 2% to 10% for the and various bonuses, et cetera, but that's for the full fiscal year. So they'll be back on track July 1 after a full year reduction.
Any questions on this slide? Okay, Jake. So like I said, we needed to create some flexibility to fund commitments, contractual travel, and the various cost centers. So the goal was to try to free up $1 million in savings to fund these commitments. So what we did is we established budget targets for each of our cost centers. So we basically took a 5% reduction on their variable expenses, and it was a target. We knew a lot of the cost centers probably couldn't make it, but we wanted to give them a goal and shoot for it. So that's where we started our budget process. Again, it was really an incremental, and then it was a real challenge, to be honest with you, because the FY21 budget was so lean. It was really hard to try to meet that target, and we knew that. But we also knew that we'd have some cost centers that didn't have those contractual commitments, that they could probably come down on their budget a little bit, and we could reallocate funds. So of this, we saved about $1 million in 23 different cost centers, and most of which were administrative units. And then we also found about a $1.5 million in savings in our central budgets, and that basically came from our arena rent, which we're reducing because with lower attendance on the ticket sales, we're actually, because our rent is based on attendance, we actually lowered that expense line as well, or there's actually about 4 expense lines. We reduced that, and then we also reduced our debt service because we refinanced our PNC debt, which saved us quite a bit for next year. So that was another 1.5 in savings there. And like I said, most of these savings we reallocated, and if you look at in their budget book, most of this went back to the Olympic sports. A lot of our team sacrificed this year. A lot of them took buses when they normally would fly. A lot of them utilized vans. So we were cognizant of the student athlete experience, and we wanted to try to improve those travel costs for them, and so they can try to get back to normal. So we reallocated a lot of that back to our other Olympic sports. And then some other areas of reinvestment were our marketing and development and IT, and then our ACC network. So you can see how we kind of got to our total expense budget, basically reallocating funds. Any questions on this one?
Jeff, can you go back one slide? Just have one quick question.
Sure.
So Vince, you mentioned that this is the last year or whatever of some of these dollars. These in essence are really, they're budgeted for purposes of, our cash outlays, but they're really non-recurring. Is it typical to leave them in a budget like this, or are they kind of below the line, from the standpoint, they're funded obligations, I get that, but they're not really budget numbers per se, correct?
Correct. They wouldn't be, to your point, use the right word. They're non-recurring in that sense that they're not lifelong, like true operating expenses, but we do put them in here. We don't put them as part of being funded by restricted dollars or capital gifts. We're funding them out of the operations budget. We've kept the capital gifts related to donor intent of those capital projects unless unrestricted. But
Got it. I just think
I guess the bigger point, Larry, is underlying in this, in my comments, even during my self-eval early, was we have a real potential to reload our rainy day fund if we're as disciplined as this budget allows us, because you can see that even since we've been putting this together and compiling numbers, things are changing quite rapidly on attendance.
No, that's right. These are like loan obligations. Once they're paid off, any additional dollars go to rainy day.
Correct.
I think we're on the next slide. So like on the revenue side, this is on the expense side of the ledger. So you can see I've got 3 years of actual and then 2 budget. So again, if you take the Chick-fil-A out of that 1077, we're down about 103, which again puts us right in line with where we were in FY18. So again, a very conservative budget, and hopefully we can stick to that number. But you can see it's a very conservative figure on the expense side as well.
You know, Larry, it makes me, when I look at this chart, it makes me think about your question, because if you looked at the real run rate of operations and what those operating expenses are relative to what we put in this bar chart, because if you look back in those fiscal 18, 19, 20, the way accounting works is you do have to book those obligations at that time related to the obligation with John Schnatter, or the obligation related to Bobby Petrino when you book it, and it artificially inflates what gets posted in what our operating expenses were versus what the real quote unquote day-to-day operating expenses are. We've had some one-time expenses related to changeover and obviously of Tom and Rick or others that were in here, but I think that's why I'm pretty excited about what the future years hold in terms of the athletic department's ability to generate significant profit.
Yeah, what they are, Vince, are add backs, effectively.
Sorry,
Exactly.
Larry, I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
Yeah, effectively, looking at it from a cash flow standpoint, they're amount to add backs. I mean, they're obligations.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I just didn't catch that. Dan Durbin, is there anything you would add?
No, I think what you're looking at is basically the difference between cash and accruals. So yeah, you hit it right on the head, Larry. That was perfect.
Okay. Like on the revenue, this is sources of increases and decreases on the expense side. You can see our debt service, we had about 700,000 savings there. Team recruiting actually went down a little bit. I think this is how a lot of our sports tried to meet their reduction targets. Team travel, if you look at it, that's mostly in football and basketball. Due to their scheduling, their team travel went down, but all other sports went up. So that's a little misleading, but it did overall went down about 262. And then you can kind of see some of the other increases and decreases with on the increase side, you can see starting from the bottom, that team other, that's our Chick-fil-A, again, the 4.2 million in guarantee or our ticket expense. Legal, that's 2 million of that is for the naming rights, and 1.3 of that is for the Petrino settlement. And then our contingency went up. Again, that was for postseason bonuses, and then I built a little bit more for contingency. And then there's our salary amount, the 1.4 million. So those are our biggest increases to get to the 1077 from the current year budget.
Question on this slide. I hate to bring it up at this time, but you've got a label legal expense, and I'm curious what our legal expenses have been the last 5 years, and if we have enough set aside for what's coming ahead.
They've been pretty high, especially like 3 years ago, but they've actually tailed off a little bit. In terms of the future, it's hard to really say. We've got a pretty healthy budget just for the operating piece of it for other lawsuits, so I feel comfortable we can handle that when it comes up.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, Steve, it runs a few $100,000, kind of a toll gate, if you will, that we've been running in, over the last number of years. There hadn't been, as you know, there terrific amount of activity related to anything NCAA related until we get further down the road.
Right. I'm thinking the FBI investigation, and when we do our full investigation into the Chris Mack deal, men's basketball, what the NCAA will do. Just kind of wondering what that forecast might look like for, if we have enough set aside for that. But I gather it's small in relation to the income that would come from the television. It just jumps out at me. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, next slide. And like on the revenue side, this shows you the sources of the expenses. So 53% of our budget goes toward our sports. And to the right, you can see the breakout. Football is about 23%. Basketball, the other sports are about 24%, and then basketball is about 6%. The other big area is game management facilities. It's pretty expensive to run our games. That's all our security and ticket takers. And then the other categories are other and administrative. And this runs pretty consistent from year to year. And here's that financial aid graph I was referring to earlier. So this is the total picture of what we fund. It's against 3 years of actual and then 2 budgets. So this is what we fund out of our operating budget for not only tuition, but books, room, board, and then the cost of attendance. So you can see we're up to about $15.8 million for next year's budget. Any questions on the financial aid? And then here's the breakout by the type. So you can see about 86% of it is for our student athletes, and then we've got $900,000 for summer aid, and then we fund some sport managers. Those are the guys who work in the sports. We actually give some financial aid there, and then our 5th year, and then the non-sport are our tutors. We've got some sports medicine staff who are on scholarship. So that gives you an idea of the breakout by the consumer of our tuition dollars. And then this is an overview of our debt service for next year. So total debt service next year is $9.2 million. Again, this is a big drop since we refinanced that PNC note. And I've got this broken out by the amount budgeted from our operating budget, which is that middle column. About $1.7 million is from our operating. And then pledges and cash that we've built up over the year. We've got about 7.5 in there to fund our principal and interest payments. The one piece we don't know yet is the Republic revolving line of credit. That's our working capital. To date, we took $5 million in April and another $4 million in May, so we're about $9 million right now. That $20 million that was approved, and then we'll take probably one more draw when we start to close the books to see what our deficit's looking like. So we should have a P&I number on that in July, and we'll start paying that as well. And then the final slide is just an analysis of our contingency. You can see our FY21 and our 22 and then the increase. Again, we budgeted an increase of about $9.2 million in our bonuses. We were a little bit higher on that, but we're going to pursue some bonus insurance again next year. So that's another way we try to reduce our expenses, is try to offload some of our staff performance bonuses onto an insurance policy. And we did that, I think it was 2 years ago. And it's a good way to kind of mitigate some of that exposure. And then we increased our postseason by $1 million there. That's really for our bowl game. We go to bowl game next year. That's what our expenses will run, usually a little higher than that. And then an increase of about $276 in our true contingency for emergencies, anything that we forgot to budget. And then finally, our excise tax. I had to budget a little bit more there because we actually were a little low this year. So I put an extra $200,000 in that line for next year. So. Any questions on the? Yeah.
How does the insurance work?
We work with our risk management department, Sandy Russell. She was really instrumental in helping us 2 years ago, and we basically give them our total bonus exposure. So it's really baseball, football, women's basketball, and baseball. And we give them, okay, let's say Chris Mack wins the national title. What's our exposure there? And so they'll look at all that exposure, and then we'll give us quotes on different levels. For next year, we'll probably look at insuring football and maybe women's basketball, depending on the amount of coverage. And then they'll give us a quote, and then we'll work through Sandy to actually get the insurance. And then if we have that coverage, the insurance company will actually reimburse us for the cost we pay the coaches for their bonus.
So roughly what would that cost be?
We did it that 1 year. It seemed like it was $200,000 to $300,000. I can get back to you, Steve. I think it was like $200,000 or $300,000.
Okay, that's just interesting to me that you can almost get insurance for anything. That's pretty good.
Yeah, there's a big market for it too. There's several different companies that do it.
And Steve, on that front, it's used by a lot of universities, particularly on some of the higher bonuses. But obviously, if you continue to hit it every year, I think Clemson would tell you that eventually Dabo becomes uninsurable.
Thank you. I hope we have that problem.
Jeff, this is Sam. It appears to me that our biggest risk in the budget is probably ticket sales, and also that's probably also our biggest opportunity.
Yeah.
Is my sense of that correct, or are there other places that I need to be looking?
Yeah, I feel like that's true on the ticket sales. In terms of risk, Sam, we feel like we took a pretty conservative approach, frankly, especially knowing what we know today. we started on this back in on the revenue side back in February, March timeframe, but at 80% of 2 years ago revenue, felt pretty good at the time, knowing where capacity was going. And now that 28 of the 30 NFL stadiums have been approved by their states for 100% capacity, we would hope that we fall in line and everyone remains safe and follows protocols, and we get to that same area as far as our stadium, both football stadium and to the arena. If that's the case, we've got significant upside, as you can tell from in the budget, in that 5 million plus or minus 5 million on revenue.
Thank you.
Those capital line pulls, 5 and 4, were they to cover cost of deficit that we expect, or those for other projects?
So basically, our payroll runs about 3.5 million a month. So our cash has been right at break even. So we've been trying to basically fund our personnel costs for that first month to keep our cash in the black. In April, I think we ended with about 1.1 million. So it worked out well. And all of our teams are traveling right now. So we're expecting a lot of expenses to hit in the month of May. So I built another little cushion there of about 500,000 to hopefully offset some of that travel that's coming in, plus our payroll. And then, the good thing is our ACC money will be coming in June. I think actually some of it next week. So our cash will go up significantly in the month of June. So it's kind of just to float us through those 2 months. But basically just to cover our payroll expenses is the most part. Any other questions?
Hey, Jeff, over here. Yeah. Hey, can you explain the Chick-fil-A deal? Because it looks like you were offsetting the $4 million revenue with a $4 million expense.
Sure. We've got to buy the tickets for the game. So the guarantee is, I think, 4.2, and the ticket expense is right there. So it's on us to try to sell as many tickets as we can on that. So we have to actually buy all those.
There is a clawback there, Eric. What it does, basically the way they do these games, supported from the TV side, is they give you the opportunity, but you earn your way back, if you will, by the sale of tickets for Ole Miss and ourselves.
Then if we sell those back, that becomes more revenue?
Yes. Yeah, effectively it's lower. We would apply that. We have the revenue and the expense booked. You would apply any ticket sales, gained in the revenue against the expense line item. You would net the expense further down.
Okay, thank you again.
So buy a ticket.
Well done, Jeff. Vince,
Thank you.
Vince, one last question for you. Does Jeff ever get any vacation time?
I have to cover for him a lot, Steve.
We monitor that closely. We got to give him some vacation so that he's on top of his game.
No, in all sincerity, to that point, one of the points of emphasis with the senior staff was to take vacation. COVID started last year, and we were in return to campus protocols starting May 27th. So the summer, generally, you only have July, as most know, for an athletics to take time away, and we didn't get it last summer. So most of our staff has gone round the clock this year. So that's been a point of emphasis in their evals, is to get out of here, get some health with their family.
You heard the boss, Jeff. Now's your chance.
See you next year.
Any other questions? Dan, any closing comments from you?
No, it's been a highly collaborative process. My compliments to Jeff. I think we've got a good sound budget at this point.
Wonderful. If there are no other, don't want to rush anybody, but if there are no other questions or comments, we can conclude this budget workshop. I'm very grateful to each of you for taking the time to participate. As you can see, Vince and his team have worked really hard in a very tough year, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share that with all of you. All right. So you got to do go cards before you sign off. So thank you, everyone, and go cards.
Go cards.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.